I walked out of the courthouse, free once again, but carrying a heavy heart. My anger was slowly fading, and to my surprise, I hadn't been screwed over too badly this time. I headed towards the public parking lot, where my trusty old F-150 was waiting. It was a 40-mile drive home, and I needed to hit the road soon. My children would be coming home from school, and I needed to be there for them. Though a neighbor woman watched them while I was busy, I felt a strong urge to spend as much time with them as possible since their mother was no longer around. As I passed a small, dingy bar near the police station, something inexplicable pulled me inside. The noise inside dropped noticeably as the patrons turned to scrutinize the outsider. I could tell I didn't belong. Nearly everyone in sight wore a law enforcement uniform or had a badge proudly displayed. Most were armed, too. I paused to let my eyes adjust to the dimly lit interior after the blinding August afternoon sun. I almost sighed in relief as the ice-cold air enveloped me. The thermometer at the courthouse square read a blistering 108 degrees Fahrenheit, with not a whisper of wind. My shirt, soaked with sweat from both the walk and the tense courtroom proceedings, clung uncomfortably to my skin. I was sure my body odor was more noticeable than I'd like. Navigating through smoke so thick it seemed you could cut it with a knife, I made my way to the bar. Despite the health-conscious times, the patrons smoked like chimneys, perhaps as a way to relieve the tension of their jobs. I cast another glance around the room before taking an empty seat at the bar. The bartender looked me over for a moment before approaching, her raised eyebrow and silence clearly signaling that I wasn't welcome. I leaned forward and said, "Dos Equis Lager." No glass. The bartender turned and sauntered over to the coolers, rummaging around before pulling a bottle from the back. She popped the top and set it down in front of me with a thud. "That'll be $4.75. I took a deep, satisfying pull from the bottle, savoring the coldest beer I'd tasted in a week. Moe's was famous for serving the coldest beer in the county, keeping their cooler at a frosty 30 degrees Fahrenheit. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my wallet, and dropped a $5 bill on the bar. Once more, she kept silent as she picked up the bill and headed to the cash register. Since her husband Mo passed away, she's been the owner and sole full-time employee. Without a word, she slapped my 25 cents in change onto the bar in front of me, then turned and waddled away. By this point, I had already downed nearly 2/3 of my Dos Equis. The bartender continued to pointedly ignore me. I wondered if they'd serve me another beer if I asked. In the mirror behind the bar, I watched the other patrons resume their interrupted conversations as the noise level climbed back up. I had maybe 1 or 2 swallows of beer left when a group at one of the tables decided to leave. 2 members of the group stared at me as they passed on their way to the door. The third, a plainclothes officer, stopped beside me. "It's been a long time, Dean. Why did you come back?" he asked. I looked up at the big guy and contemplated whether I could take him down again. Even after all these years, the urge was strong. I was in better shape now, and he looked softer. I might be able to beat him, but I really didn't want to. Our last encounter hadn't ended well for either of us. I forced myself to relax, letting the tension drain from my body. Stupid, I guess, Sam. Just finished up in court and decided to have a brew before heading home. That's not against the law, is it? Just shook off my 3rd strike and ditched another cheating skank. Needed a beer before going home. I laughed, then added, "But you probably know all about that. I'm sure you or someone you know has been sampling her cheating ways too." Sam smirked at me. "Legally, you can drink wherever you're man enough to, but you make people nervous. Why don't you find another place to drink, somewhere you aren't bothering other customers? None of us want a loser like you around. Makes us look bad, being seen with a guy who can't keep his women from cheating." I laughed. "Oh, I'll consider it. I get it. Makes sense not to drink with old friends. Are some of them afraid I'll still go after them? Or did one of them sleep with Paula too? If so, tell them I don't care. Learned my lesson after you slept with Terry. Are you still with that cheater?" Sam tensed and leaned in closer. I knew he was still married to my ex, and I also knew their relationship was rocky. They'd both been unfaithful, separated multiple times, and yet somehow always got back together. It was surprising their marriage had lasted 7 years. I was only married to her for 18 months before I kicked her out for cheating. I wondered why Sam didn't do the same. Some guys just don't seem to care about things like that. When I discovered that Sam was having an affair with my first wife, I decided to handle the situation myself. Over several nights while on duty, I discreetly left my patrol area, waiting for the moment I'd anticipated. Eventually, I spotted Sam's car parked near my home. I pulled into my driveway, entered my house, and found Sam and Terry in bed, cooing and cuddling after their escapades. The only thing that kept me out of jail that night were the hidden cameras I had installed to cover the bedroom and living area. I slammed the door so hard it ricocheted off the stop, jolting the sleepy lovers into a frenzy. As I stood at the foot of the bed, glaring at my ex-friend and soon-to-be ex-wife, Terry screamed. She scrambled to cover herself with the sheet, fear evident on her face. Sam leaped from the bed and moved toward me, ready for confrontation. Knowing exactly how to provoke him, I started verbally attacking him, demanding that he get out of my house and warning that I would inform his wife about his infidelity. I had my cell phone in hand, snapping photos just in case the video cameras missed anything. Sam swore and knocked the phone from my hands before trying to hit me again. I retaliated by kicking him in the groin and slamming my knee into his face as he doubled over. He crumpled to the floor, unconscious. For good measure, I delivered one final kick before turning to Terry, who was still cowering in fear. I told her to be out of the house before my shift ended. Grabbing my phone, I left the house and returned to my cruiser, confident that the cameras in my home were capturing everything and feeding it to a computer in my locked office. I drove straight to Sam's home. It was nearly 3 a.m. when I arrived and rang the doorbell at the Garcia residence. A very sleepy wife answered the door, and when she saw me standing there in uniform, she screamed, "Oh no. Please, not Sam." "Yeah, Sam, but not in the way you fear, Mrs. Garcia. I just came from home and found him in bed with my wife. I have pictures if you need them." "Oh no, that can't be. He's supposed to be at the station tonight. He's the sergeant of the watch." "I'm sorry, Mrs. Garcia, but you've been misinformed. He was off duty today. Jackson is actually the sergeant of the watch. Do you want me to send you the pictures? If so, please give me your email and I'll get them to you in a day or two." "No, I can't believe that. Sam wouldn't do that to me." "Yes, he did. Take a look." I showed her some pictures on my phone and she collapsed on the floor, crying. I felt sorry for her, but also felt a sense of satisfaction for bringing more pain to Sam. I turned away from the crying woman, smiled to myself, and walked back to my cruiser to continue my patrol. Approximately 30 minutes after leaving the Garcia home, I was summoned back to the station. I was relieved of duty and suspended without pay for leaving my patrol area and for attacking an officer in the line of duty. Surprisingly, Garcia and Terry had informed the lieutenant that she had called for help thinking there was an intruder in our home. It was claimed that upon arriving home for intimacy, I saw Sam in the house and went into a rage, accusing them of infidelity and physically attacking him. I used the video footage from my house to defend myself against the accusations of assaulting Sam. Those images prevented me from being arrested for attacking Sam. However, they resulted in him being demoted back to the ranks and suspended from the force for a temporary period. So even though I believed my actions were justified, Sam had his own reasons to hold animosity toward me. Well, that marriage fell apart, and my job went with it. I was fired for my mistakes and taken to the cleaners by dear sweet Terry. I lost the house and half of our savings. I was ordered to pay support to her, but thankfully that ended in less than a year when she married Sam after his divorce was final. Sam hated me with a passion. I could see his fists clenching with the desire to strike me. Part of me almost wanted him to, but I hoped he wouldn't. I glared at Sam and waited. It was his move. Finally, he smirked at me and said, "Yeah, Terry and I are still married, asshole. No thanks to you. I know you're the one sending us those incriminating pictures. Why don't you get a life and leave us alone?" He laughed and added, "Or not. Hell, you may be doing me a favor." She's heard so often that I'm a cheating bastard and seen so many pictures you sent that now I could cheat on her and she wouldn't believe it. You've caused some problems, but I gotta admit you've helped me too. I almost told him I wasn't the one taking and sending most of the pictures. I had snapped some of Sam one night, and another officer had seen me. He and some of his colleagues liked what I had done and started doing it too. There were many officers who hated Sam's guts for one reason or another, some for the same reasons I did. They were making his and Terry's life pretty miserable. I also didn't tell him I had only sent one set of photos. I wasn't following him or her and never had. The one picture I had sent was just a chance encounter, seeing him with another woman in a bar shortly after my divorce from Terry. Now, I couldn't care less. Sam turned and walked jauntily out the door. I squinted as the sunlight burst through the door behind him. One of my last remaining friends in law enforcement came in as Sam left. When she saw me sitting at the bar, she smiled and walked toward me. Jackie and I had been in the police academy together. She had joined the sheriff's department while I went to the city police force. She glided across the floor and took the stool beside me. Our taciturn bartender looked up at Jackie and raised her eyebrows. "Usual?" she asked. Jackie nodded and pointed at my Dos Equis bottle, then held up 2 fingers. In moments, a beer was set in front of each of us. Jackie handed a 10 to our host and waved her away. We each took several sips of our beer. Then Jackie looked at me in the bar mirror. "I was in the courthouse earlier. I saw you in family court. Heard about Paula. Dan, Dean, you sure can't pick them, can you? What is it now? 3?" I sighed and nodded. "Yeah, you know it is. Sam got the ball rolling with Terry. Hell, that one only took about 18 months. Then there was the kid's mom, Mary. At least she lasted almost 5 years before I caught her with the Dan football coach at her school. Patty was a real surprise, though. Shit, we were only married 9 months when I began to suspect she was stepping out on me. Guess I should have known that would happen. Damn, I was an officer and knew how." I saw Jackie's face tighten and hurriedly continued, "Sorry, Jackie. I didn't mean to imply all women on the force are like that. I'm just bitter. She was a damn dispatcher, for Christ's sake." "Oh, hell, I don't know what I mean. Crap." Jackie smiled and placed her dainty hand on my forearm. "I know, Dean. Hell, it's almost a job hazard. There's so much tension and testosterone in the air that we're all tempted. Some of us just don't have the willpower to ignore the temptation and go home for our release." "Yeah, whatever. I notice you and Ed haven't succumbed to the temptation, though. If you guys and some of the others can do it, why couldn't Patty or Sam?" "Hell, you know from your time on the force, Dean. Some people are just weak. Some are serial womanizers like Sam. Now cheer up, drink your beer, and get home to those kids." She shook her head and said, "That's one I'll never figure out. I still can't believe Mary just took off for an overseas job and left those darling kids with you. How can a mother, hell, how can any parent just take off and leave their children like that?" "Don't know, Jackie, but I'm damn glad she did. I really thought when the court refused to let her take them out of the country, she would stay here or try to take them anyway. I love having them home with me. Little Howard finished kindergarten this year, and Sarah was in 1st grade. Everything is still new and exciting for them, and they have such a zest for life. I couldn't stand it if she had stayed and kept primary custody of them. Sometimes it's hard working and arranging for their care, but I wouldn't do it any differently for love or money." Jackie and I finished our beers at the same time. We sat for a moment, just enjoying each other's company. Finally, with a sigh, Jackie stood to leave and said, "Guess I should go. I still have to fix supper for Ed, get some laundry done, and then get to bed in time to be fresh as a daisy for the morning shift." I stood and followed her out of the dim bar into the glaring light and heat of another August afternoon in southwest Missouri. We had both parked in the same lot, so we visited as we walked to our vehicles. On the way home, I thought about my last failure in the romance department. At least this time, I had been smart enough to get a prenuptial agreement from Patty. We each walked away from the marriage with what we had brought into it and split the small amount we had accumulated in the little over a year it had lasted. I had been operating the family farm when my second marriage failed, but did not own it yet. Because of that, I only had to divide bank accounts with Mary. She had been very angry about that. For some reason, she thought my mother had signed the farm over to me when Dad died. Actually, all she had done was turn over the operation to me. I suppose since Mom referred to it as my farm, Mary thought that meant I owned the land, equipment, and animals. Now I wondered if that was why she had married me. Mom passed away shortly after Candy and I divorced, and I inherited the farm. It wasn't a big place, just about 2 sections, but it provided a good living. In fact, I earned more from the farm than I would have as a patrolman had I not lost that job. Besides, I enjoyed the work and the freedom much more. If I didn't feel like working some days, I could just take it easy. Life was tough, but I loved it on the farm. I got home about 45 minutes after leaving Joplin. My 2 kids and their sitter were in the backyard. The kids were playing in their wading pool while Tammy sat at the picnic table, reading and watching them. Sarah jumped out of the pool and ran toward me when she saw me. Howard followed more slowly. I hugged both kids and headed to the kitchen for a beer. I returned to the table and sat across from Tammy. "Hey, Dean, is it all over now?" "Yeah, I'm out of the game, Tam. Just struck out in the bottom of the 9th. I gazed out over the brown, dry grass in the yard. Through the trees lining the stream bank, I could barely see the small creek that separated my yard from the south field. My mind drifted to a more pressing problem than my 3rd failed marriage. I'd started feeding my cattle hay almost 3 weeks early, and I was worried I wouldn't have enough to last the winter if it didn't rain soon. The news reported this as the worst drought in 65 years. Cornfields that usually yielded between 150 and 200 bushels per acre had been chopped for silage because the grain was too poor to mature for combining. Other crops were faring just as badly due to the lack of water. Many farmers were selling cattle they wouldn't normally sell because they couldn't feed them. It was expected to get much worse before it got better. I could manage, thanks to crop insurance, but things would be tight. At least I could irrigate some of my grassland by pumping water from the stream. I glanced at Tammy and saw her watching me. I tried to smile. "Well, I can watch the kids for the rest of the day, Tam. Why don't you head home? I don't think I'll need you tomorrow, but I'll call if I do." That fall, Sarah was in 2nd grade and Howard in 1st. Shortly after school started, Tammy came to see me. "Dean, I won't be able to watch the kids after school much this year. Things aren't getting any better for Jack and me. Jack's already working part-time at the feed mill, but we're going to lose the farm if I can't find a full-time job in town. I'm sorry, but I need more money to get us through this drought. I'll watch them until I find a job or you find someone else, but you should plan on finding someone soon. If my schedule allows, I can still help out occasionally." "That's rough, Tam. I'm sorry to hear that. If you and Jack need anything and I can help, let me know. The kids love you so much. Do you know anyone who can help?" "No, not offhand. I'll keep my eye out. Sorry." In early October, Tammy stayed to talk after I came in from the field. "Dean, have you found a sitter yet?" "No. I found an older woman in town willing to watch them part-time, but no one wants to come out here. Most aren't willing to stay late when I'm working in the fields, or they want a guaranteed full-time job." "Why? Did you find work?" "Sort of. I got hired at Walmart for the Christmas season. They said I might stay on full-time if things work out. I start next week. Sorry." Between Tammy, the older woman, and a few friends' wives, I managed childcare through the holidays and until early March. But juggling helpers was tough. Some wouldn't come to the farm. Others had no transportation, so I had to deliver the kids to the sitter in the afternoon and pick them up late at night. Sometimes I had to stop work early because no sitter would keep the kids late. In early March, I was repairing machinery in the shop when I heard a car drive up. I saw a sheriff's car in the driveway and Jackie walking back to her car. I smiled and yelled, "Hi, Jackie. What brings you out here?" Did they finally find the body where I left it? "Not funny, Dean. I have a little problem and thought you might help. Have you found someone to watch your kids yet?" "Sort of. I have half a dozen people who watch them sometimes. I miss a lot of work hauling them around and sometimes have to stop working early to pick them up. I haven't found anyone who can be on call all the time and watch them here. Why? Jackie looked embarrassed. Well, my sister isn't much better at picking husbands than you are at picking wives. She caught her husband cheating a few weeks ago and kicked him out. She filed for divorce and needs work. This is the second husband she's caught cheating. She was a stay-at-home mom, and the job market is tough. She thinks she'll lose the house, too. They've been renting. Jack and I said she could stay with us, but she needs a job. Her ex isn't sending money. How about it? Mom passed away soon after Candy and I divorced, and that's when I inherited the farm. It wasn't a large farm, only about 2 sections, but it provided a good living. In fact, I made more profit on the farm than I would have as a patrolman if I hadn't lost my job. Besides the financial benefit, I enjoyed the work and freedom much more on the farm. Some days, if I didn't feel like working, I could just take the day off. Life was tough, but I loved it. I got home about 45 minutes after leaving Joplin. My 2 kids and their sitter were in the backyard. The kids were playing in their wading pool while Tammy sat at the picnic table, reading and keeping an eye on them. When Sarah saw me, she jumped out of the pool and ran toward me, with Howard following slowly behind. I hugged both of them and went to the kitchen for another beer. I sat down across from Tammy at the table. "Hey Dean, is it all over now?" she asked. "Yeah, I'm out at the ballgame now, Tam. Just struck out in the bottom of the 9th. I looked out over the dry, brown grass in the yard. Through the trees lining the stream, I could barely see the small creek separating my yard from the south field. I let my mind wander to a more pressing problem than my 3rd failed marriage. I had started feeding my cattle hay almost 3 weeks earlier, and I was worried I wouldn't have enough to get through the winter if it didn't rain soon. This was the worst drought in 65 years, according to the news. Cornfields that usually yielded between 150 and 200 bushels per acre had already been chopped for silage because the grain was too poor to mature for combining. Other crops were suffering just as badly from the lack of water. Many farmers were already selling cattle they normally wouldn't because they couldn't feed them. It was expected to get much worse before it got better. I could survive thanks to my crop insurance, but things would be tight. At least I could irrigate some of my grassland by pumping water from the stream running through my farm. I looked over at Tammy and saw her watching me. I tried to smile and said, "Well, I can watch the kids for the rest of the day, Tam. Why don't you head on home? I don't think I'll need you tomorrow, but I'll call if I do." That fall, Sarah started 2nd grade and Howard started 1st grade. Shortly after school began, Tammy came to see me. "Dean, I can't watch the kids after school much this year. Jack and I are struggling, and he's already working part-time at the feed mill. We're going to lose the farm if I can't find a full-time job in town. I'm sorry I can't stay on with you. I need more money to get us through this drought. I'll watch them until I find a job or you find someone else, but you'd better start looking." "Sorry to hear that, Tam. If you and Jack need anything, let me know. Do you know anyone who can help?" "No, not offhand. I'll keep an eye out, though. Sorry." In early October, Tammy stayed to talk one evening after I came in from the field. "Dean, have you found a sitter yet?" "No, I found an older woman in town willing to watch them part-time, but I can't find anyone willing to come out here. Most of them don't want to stay late the nights I'm working in the fields, or they want a guaranteed full-time job." "Why? Did you find work?" "Sort of. I got hired at Walmart for the Christmas season. They said I might stay on full-time if things work out. I'm supposed to start next week. Sorry." Between Tammy, the older woman in town, and a couple of friends' wives, I managed to cover my childcare needs through the holidays and into early March. Juggling helpers was tough. Some wouldn't come to the farm, and others couldn't transport themselves, so I had to stop working to drop off and pick up the kids. Sometimes that was really late, and other times I had to stop working earlier than planned because no sitter could keep the kids late. In early March, I was in the shop repairing some machinery when I heard a car drive up. I walked to see the driveway and saw a sheriff's car. Jackie was walking back toward her car. I smiled and yelled, "Hi, Jackie. What brings you out here? Did they finally find the body where I left it?" "Not funny, Dean." I have a problem and thought you might be able to help. Had you found someone to watch your kids yet? Sort of. I have half a dozen people who watch them part-time, but I miss a lot of work hauling them around. Sometimes I have to stop working early to pick them up. I still haven't found anyone who can be on call all the time and watch them here. Why? Jackie looked embarrassed. Well, my sister's husband cheated on her, and she kicked him out. She filed for divorce and needs work. She's been a stay-at-home mom, and you know how the job market is. She thinks she'll lose the house, too. Jack and I said they could stay with us for a while, but she still needs a job. How about it? I vaguely remembered Jackie's sister. Jackie was a couple of years behind me in school, and Candy was a couple of years behind her. Jackie, that's a lot of driving. It's about 25 miles from your place to mine. Yeah, but she really needs the work, Dean. Well, I don't know. Some days I wouldn't need her more than 3 hours. Other days, I'd need her in the morning and later in the evening. Would she want to stay here all day? Would she expect to be paid for the time waiting on the kids? After taxes and gas, she wouldn't make much on short days. Are you sure she wants to do this? I don't know, Dean, but she needs something. Other days, she'll probably get 12 or 14 hours when you're planting or harvesting, so things will even out. Yeah, but I might not need her some days. She has kids too, right? Jackie nodded. Who's going to watch them? Oh, she'll bring them here, won't she? Or are they in school? How will she handle that? That could help her if they're not in school. They could eat here as part of the deal, and she wouldn't have to worry about childcare. Jackie said the kids weren't in school yet, which was a relief. This might work out. I smiled and said, have her come visit, and we'll see what happens. Jackie and I chatted a bit more before she left. She said she needed to get back on patrol. Must be nice to be a deputy sheriff and just drive around most of the county with no worries. 2 days later, just after I got the kids on the school bus, a ratty old Mustang pulled into my drive. I worried I'd have to give the driver a gallon of oil before they could leave. It was burning so much. I watched as a pretty but run-down, pale-looking young woman climbed out of the old beat-up car. Inside, 2 young children were bouncing around, trying to see out. Once again, I was in the shop, wiping grease off my hands as I walked toward her. She looked slightly familiar, and I was pretty sure this was Jackie's younger sister, Candy. As I got closer, I smiled. She seemed hesitant and a little frightened. You must be Candy, unless I miss my guess. Jackie told me you'd be coming to visit. I don't think I would have recognized you if I hadn't been expecting you. Candy gave me a tentative smile and nodded. Yeah, I hate to bother you like this, Dean, Mr. Peterson, but I'm really desperate. My husband doesn't send enough money to get the kids what they need sometimes, and I just can't ask Jackie and her husband to provide everything for us. I feel like such a worthless freeloader as it is. First things first, Candy. You had it right the first time. My name is Dean, and that's what I want you to call me, whether you work for me or not. Now, why don't you come on in, and we'll see what we can work out. Candy looked at me for a moment, then turned to the kids with a scared expression. She walked to the door of her car and said, "Now you two sit still and don't touch anything. I have to go talk to Mr. Peterson for a few minutes, then we'll leave." I stopped and turned back to her. "Whoa there, Missy. I didn't mean for you to leave your babies out here in the heat. Bring them in too. It isn't right to leave kids alone in a vehicle. They can't get into anything my kids haven't been into time after time, you know." Candy looked surprised. She gave me a weak smile, then turned and said, "Okay, you two. Get out of the car and come with me. Now, I don't want you running around and causing trouble, either, you hear me?" I watched as a little boy, maybe 4 years old, jumped down from the front seat. His mother tried to catch him under the arms and somewhat succeeded. He looked up at her and said, "I can do it myself, Mama. You help Sissy." While Candy helped Sissy from the child seat in the back, the little boy marched up to me and said, "Hi, mister. I'm Timmy, and I'm this many." He held up 4 fingers. "I get to go to school next year." "Timmy, I told you to be good. Now don't bother Mr. Peterson." I looked up from where I was squatting in front of Timmy to see Candy coming toward me with a little girl on her hip. The girl was chewing on her finger as she gave me the once-over. Dean, as he already told you, this is Tim, my son, and this little angel is Celeste, my daughter, but I'm afraid we call her Sissy most of the time. Hi, Sissy, I said. If it's okay with your mother, would you and your brother like some juice when we get into the kitchen? Sissy grinned at me and nodded before trying to hide her head in her mother's shoulder. Once inside, I asked about drinks and seated everyone at the kitchen table. I placed a cookie jar in the center and gave everyone their drink and a napkin. Candy and I talked about what I needed in a babysitter and what I could afford to pay. She agreed on $35 a day for watching my kids, with no hourly limit if she and the kids could eat with us every day. She even agreed to do some housework and cooking on the days she was here. She also agreed to stay around most days instead of driving back and forth, which would save her money on gasoline since I often only needed her in the mornings and evenings. I showed her around the house so she could see where things were. She agreed to begin working the next day. To my surprise, Howard and Sarah took to her and her children right away. They had been somewhat unhappy with some of the previous caregivers. As I began working longer hours with my spring planting, Candy's help became invaluable. I had about a third of my tillable ground in winter wheat and the rest, about 600 acres, split between corn and soybeans. I had 60 brood cows and 300 acres for grazing or hay, along with a few chickens and hogs. Spring and fall were my busiest times. During the first week, Candy completely cleaned my house. She started in the kitchen, then moved to the bathrooms and other rooms. On the third day, I sat at the table and said, "Candy, I feel bad about some of the things you're doing here. I hired you to watch the kids, not to be a house cleaner. This place looks great, but I don't want you to think you have to do this too." Candy looked upset and said, "I thought you said light cleaning could be part of my job. I'm sorry if I upset you. I was just trying to help, Dean. I'll stop if you want me to. I just hate to sit here all day reading and watching the kids play." Oh, she pulled her hands to her mouth and her eyes widened. "I won't charge you for it. I know it would be a lot to pay for all the hours I'm not watching the kids. I just feel like I need to do more." No, Candy, that's not the problem. I just don't want you to make a habit of working yourself to death. Relax some. I appreciate all you've done, but you don't need to be running yourself ragged all day, every day. Over the next week, I would sometimes find Candy sitting and watching her children play while she read. Every time I came in and she was resting, she would look guilty and begin working. Finally, one day, I got myself a beer and walked into the room where she was working. "Candy, I need to talk to you for a few minutes. Would you please come into the kitchen with me?" Candy looked up from her dusting and said, "I'm sorry, Dean. I was just resting for a moment." I sighed and walked over to Candy, gently taking the dust rag from her hand. Leading her to the couch, I sat down and pulled her down beside me. Turning to her, I said, "That's kind of what I want to talk to you about. Candy, have I ever said I was unhappy with what you do around here?" Candy bit her lip and shook her head no. "Well, if I'm not unhappy and I haven't complained or yelled at you for not doing something, then why do you always jump up and start working again when I come in? You make me feel like an ogre, like you're scared of me or something. I've told you I don't expect you to work all the time, and I don't want you to." But Charles always said no house could be too clean, and he got upset when he came in from working hard and I was resting. "Whoa there, Candy. Do I look like Charles? Do you see me resting from time to time? Have I ever said or done anything that made you think I cared if you read a book or played with your kids? I hired you to watch my kids and told you it was okay to just stay here during the day while you weren't working. You were the one who offered to do some cooking and light housework for me." I smiled and continued, "I would take it as a personal favor if you would just chill a little and relax around me." "Okay." Candy gave me a tentative smile and nodded. "I'll try, but I don't know if I can do that, Dean." Over the next couple of days, Candy got better about jumping up to work when I came in. Sometimes, if I stayed in the house for long, she couldn't stand it and would find something to do, but she was improving. One afternoon, I had just started working after a quick lunch when my planter broke. A wheel bearing froze up, stopping the wheel from turning correctly. I was stuck. I unhitched the tractor and rushed to the shop for my tools. Candy was in the yard watching her kids play when I drove into the lot. She watched as I jumped off the tractor and headed for the house, already on the phone. Candy followed me into my office as I explained my problem to the implement dealer. I was flipping through my planter manual while talking. The dealer checked if they had the necessary parts in stock so I could make the repairs. I told him I would be in as soon as possible. I hung up, muttering about the 2-hour drive and the time I would lose on the repair. I felt Candy walk up behind me and put her hand on my shoulder. I jumped at her touch, surprised but comforted. Candy said, "Dean, I heard what you said to the dealer. I can drive into town and pick up the part for you if you want. That way, you can start the repair and get back to work faster." I looked into Candy's eyes and saw her concern. I also felt relieved at the thought of saving some time. Sure, why not? "Thank you, Candy. That would be a big help. Take my truck since this is farm business. When you get back, bring it across the stream to where I'm working. You'll see the machinery in the field from there." Candy smiled and said, "No problem, Dean." She turned to the kitchen door and called, "Kids, come on. We have to go to town for Mr. Peterson. Hurry now. We have to get a part for his planter so he can get back to work." Much to my surprise, Candy and the kids had their car seats moved from her old Mustang to the back seat of my truck and were driving down my lane before I had my repair trailer hooked to the tractor. I was on my way back to the field to start my repairs less than 30 minutes after breaking down. When I got to the field, I began disassembling the planter for the repair. I found a broken weld and rewelded it. I had trouble getting the wheel and old bearing off because the race had partially welded itself to the shaft. I had just finished disassembling when Candy drove into sight. I heard her roaring through the stream and worried because I hadn't asked if she knew how to put the truck into 4-wheel drive. Sometimes you needed it because the rocks were slick and the bank was steep. Candy jumped out of the truck and reached for the parts. She turned to me with a bag from the parts store in one hand and a large insulated cup of iced tea in the other. I reached for the parts, but she shook her head. You look like you need a drink right now. It won't take long." I smiled and took the drink, downing it in less than a minute. Then she handed me the bag of parts. I turned to work and felt a presence beside me. I looked up to see little Tim squatting next to me, watching quietly. I smiled and continued working. Soon, I felt another shadow and looked up again to see Candy standing behind Tim with Sissy on her hip, both watching me. I kept working. My audience stayed silent and still. After almost 2 more hours, I tightened the last bolt and stood up. Candy stepped back, and Tim stood to watch me. I was followed back and forth as I replaced the tools in my toolbox on the repair trailer. I had told Candy 3 times that she didn't have to stay, but she had stayed anyway. She had only returned to the house once to pick up my kids when they got back from school. I looked at my audience and then turned to Candy. "I'm going to take off down the field and see if everything works okay. Would you mind waiting a minute for me to get back?" She nodded, and I continued, "If everything's fine, can you take the trailer back to the shop if I hook it up for you?" "I suppose I can try, but I wouldn't want to break it. I've never pulled a trailer before." "It's pretty easy, Candy. Just park the truck in front of the shop, and I'll put it away when I get back. Go slowly through the creek, and it'll be okay." I worked through supper that night, continuing until almost midnight. After finishing planting my corn, I headed to the house. Tomorrow, I would start preparing the field for the soybeans I planned to plant later. When I pulled up to the house, almost all the lights were on in the kitchen and living room. I left the tractor hooked to the planter in the shed and started the truck, parking it beside the tractor. I'd unhook everything in the morning. As I walked into the kitchen, I saw Candy standing by the stove, wearing an old t-shirt. From the way she moved, I didn't think she had anything on underneath. She looked over her shoulder at me and smiled. "Why don't you go clean up? I'll have your supper warmed up when you get back, Dean." "Candy, you didn't have to do this. I'm sorry I worked so late. I forgot you have to drive all the way back to Jackie's. Everything was going so well that I just kept on pushing to get done." Candy smiled and said, "Don't worry about it. I could have come and got you if I needed to leave. I called Jackie and told her you were still in the field. She looked a little unsure of herself for a moment, then continued, I told her if you didn't mind, I would just sleep here on the couch tonight since it's so late. I really hate to wake the kids up and everything. Well, I do mind, Candy. I was thoughtless, and I don't want you sleeping on my couch tonight. I stopped when I saw the shocked look on Candy's face. Oh, shoot. Candy, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it like that. I just meant I was sorry I worked so late, and I wanted you to sleep in my guest room instead of the couch. There's no reason for you to sleep on the couch when you can use the bed. Oh, I bet you put your kids in there, didn't you? Candy almost whispered, no. They all wanted to sleep with your two, so I put Tim in bed with Howard and Sissy with Sarah. That's okay, isn't it? I grinned and took a step toward Candy, then stopped. Yeah, that's fine, Candy. I'm sorry I said what I did earlier. It's fine if you stay here tonight and any other nights I get a wild hair and work too late again. I turned and walked to my master bath to clean up. When I returned to the kitchen, I found Candy preparing one of my favorite meals. She had made meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans, and whole kernel corn. It looked fantastic and tasted even better. Honestly, even a 2-day-old roadkill skunk would have tasted good at that moment. I hadn't eaten since a sandwich at lunch. The weeks flew by. My work improved more than it had in years, and Candy became almost indispensable. She practically took over the house and yard, even caring for the chickens and helping around the hog pen. I lost track of how many trips she made into town for parts, seeds, or other necessities. She was more helpful than any of my previous wives, and 2 of them had grown up on farms. Many nights, when I worked late, she and the kids would sleep over. Eventually, I suggested they leave some clothes at the house for convenience. On the 4th of July, I declared a family holiday. I was caught up enough with work to take a break and invited Candy, her kids, Jackie, and her husband Edward to my home for a large meal and a swim in the stream. After a meal of BBQ brisket, fried chicken, and all the trimmings, I watched the happy faces as the women cleaned up. I tried to help but was quickly shooed away. The 2 sisters laughed and giggled as they worked, while Ed was buried under a pile of kids. I wandered off and sat beside the stream, watching the slow flow of water through the swimming hole at the edge of the yard. I listened to the kids laughing as they played with Ed and the occasional laughter from the women. Occasionally, I heard a neighbor setting off fireworks. My stomach clenched as my mind wandered back over my past life. What I was hearing on this hot July day was what I had dreamed of throughout my 3 previous marriages. I had 2 wonderful kids and some friends, but I didn't have anyone to share it with. I was still alone and getting too old to hope for that nugget of gold other men found. Terry, the girl I grew up with, the tomboy from the next farm over, had betrayed me almost from the start. We hadn't been in the big city long before she adopted city ways, going out with female friends and eventually cheating on me with one of my colleagues. Then there was beautiful, bubbly, kind Mary, a teacher I met at the local cafe. God, how I loved that woman. She was citified but loved the country life, until she discovered what a farmer's wife had to endure. The late nights, dust, dirt, greasy clothes, and missing weekends in town eventually wore her down. Despite her professed love for children, she resented being tied down by my work and our kids. Mary spent more time with her school duties and volunteered as a chaperone on away games. Eventually, she began driving herself to the games and partying with the head coach before coming home. When I discovered the affair and confronted her, she laughed and said, "Well, at least now I can get back to the good life. I did love you once, Dean, but no real woman can take this kind of life year in and year out. I'm sorry, but I need more than sitting on the patio at night too tired to even go to bed." In the divorce, Mary was awarded primary custody of the children and tried to claim some value from the farm. She was furious when she learned my mom still owned the farm and everything on it. I was paid a wage for working the farm, and it was less than her salary, so there would be no support coming her way. I did, however, get hit hard with child support. Less than a year after our divorce, I found out Mary planned to take the children to Japan. She and her new lover had obtained jobs with the Department of Defense school system. I refused to allow her to take the children out of the country, leading to another court battle, which I won. She was forbidden from taking the children out of the state. To my surprise, she then gave me full custody. When I expressed my astonishment, she said, "What you did to me and the kids isn't right, Dean. A child should be with its mother, but I can't pass up this opportunity to see the world because you are a selfish prig. You have the children now. You'll see how hard it is to have a life and a job while taking care of them." She smiled at me, hugged the kids one last time, and left with her new partner. My third wife, Patty, cheating on me wasn't much of a surprise. In hindsight, I should never have married her. I was lonesome and desperate. We hit it off well enough at the beginning, and I chose to ignore her flirtations with her fellow officers at the sheriff's department. We met at Jackie's and started dating soon after. We had a lot in common. I had been a police officer for 2 years before losing my job due to my first marriage breaking up, and she worked as a dispatcher for the sheriff. We knew some of the same people, and she had grown up on a large farm in Iowa. I recalled how we joked around when I was in law enforcement. I ignored her actions until one day I went to see her and found her in her car with another deputy. They were on their lunch break, and she was performing a very compromising act. Furious, I ended up in another altercation, but at least he didn't press charges, and I didn't have a job to lose this time. As I sat slumped in dejection, staring across my fields, I felt my eyes watering again, blaming the dust and bright lights. I sensed a presence nearby and turned to see Candy standing about 10 feet behind me. She frowned upon seeing my face and walked over, plopping down beside me. "What's wrong, Dean?" she asked, wiping the tears from my face. "Nothing. Just sitting here listening to the happy sounds and thinking." "What are you thinking about?" "Oh, nothing much. Just reminiscing. The kids sound so happy, and it's peaceful here. I was just enjoying the day." "Bullshit. You can't fool me, Dean. From the look of your face, those weren't happy tears I wiped off your cheek. Now tell me what's wrong." I insisted nothing was wrong until she did something unexpected. She hit me with her fist and began crying. "Damn it, Dean. I've worked for you for 4 months. I've been with you almost every day, and I know something's wrong today. It's not something Jackie or the kids or I have done, because you usually tell us and you don't cry when you do. And don't try to feed me the old allergy or sunlight excuse either. You've never had trouble with allergies and you know it, and the wind isn't blowing enough to blow something into your eye." Finally, I sighed and said, "Okay, Candy. I suppose I was feeling sorry for myself. I'm a damn loser and it hurts. I was listening to the kids laughing and playing with Ed, and you girls were laughing in the kitchen while I sat here all alone. I've been married 3 times, and each time I chose a cheating woman. I've realized I'll never find or have a good woman for a wife. I'm a loser." Candy looked at me in shock, then slapped me. Before I could do more than raise my hand to my burning cheek, she started yelling, "You damn asshole. You know there's nothing wrong with you. Well, maybe there is. You're too gullible, and you don't see what a woman really is before you marry her. Then you're too trusting. No, I don't mean that. I mean they betray your trust, and you think there's something wrong with you. The only thing wrong with you is you don't do your research before you let your heart or your dick lead you into something you should run away from. I'm the one with the problem. What man wants a twice-divorced woman with 2 kids? I feel like a burden ready to drag any man down. No one wants a ready-made family that drains their income. If I can accept that and find contentment, why can't you be happy with what you have? Dean, you have 2 wonderful children, work you love, and friends who would do anything for you. You have it all, and someday you'll find the right woman if you just stay open to the possibility." Candy stood up and started toward the house, then paused. "Oh," she said. "I almost forgot. The kids are ready for cake and ice cream. That is if you can pull yourself together and join us." I sat for a moment, watching Candy as she walked briskly back to the house. Finally, I got up and followed her. When I reached the kitchen, I saw Ed sitting at the table, looking toward the living room with a puzzled expression. Ed turned to me and said, "What happened out there?" I've never seen Candy that mad. I guess I upset her. I was feeling sorry for myself, and we had a talk. She didn't like some of the things I said. Just then, Jackie came into the kitchen and glared at me. She shook her head and said, "Dean, sometimes I think you're the dumbest man on earth." She then turned and began cutting the cake, serving it with ice cream. It was quiet as we all ate. Afterward, we cleaned up and went outside into the cooler evening. We sat by the stream, watching the kids play in the water while the adults chatted. Occasionally, we saw fireworks in the distance from nearby houses and from the Steelville display. Around 10 p.m., Ed and Jackie decided to head home since they had work the next day. Candy gathered her children, and they all piled into Ed's SUV for the drive back. My children and I watched until they turned onto the highway. Then we went inside for baths and bed. That night, I struggled to sleep, replaying my past and Candy's words by the creek. Maybe she was right, but I couldn't believe it. I'd known Terry almost my entire life. How could I have predicted what she'd do? Mary was a teacher who went to church every Sunday. Who would have thought she'd cheat? I'd known her for months before we started dating, and we were together for almost a year before marrying. I thought I knew her well. Candy might have been right about Patty. We dated for only 9 months before marrying, but she worked in law enforcement and grew up on a farm. I thought I understood the kind of character those jobs required. What was I doing wrong? What was Candy trying to tell me? To my surprise, I was still asleep the next morning when Candy and her children arrived. I hadn't expected them so early because all I had planned was making hay, and I couldn't start until the dew was off the grass around 10 a.m. I woke up abruptly when 4 children burst into my room and hit the side of the bed. It was after 7 a.m. Sarah smiled and said, "Come on, Daddy. Candy's making breakfast, and she says you have to come now or it'll get cold. She's making your favorite omelets and pecan oatmeal waffles for us kids." Sissy added, "Yeah, Mr. Peterson. Come on, we gotta eat now." She started to pull the covers off me, and I grabbed the sheet. "No, don't do that, Sissy," I said. Tim and Howard, seeing what she was doing, grabbed the sheet too and pulled. I lost my grip, and the sheet fell to the floor beside the bed. As I reached for it, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Candy walked into the room and said, "Hey, what's the holdup? I need you in the kitchen right now, or the food will be cold." She looked up and froze in shock as I pulled the cover back over myself. Little Tim made things worse. "Mommy, why is Mr. Peterson naked? You won't let me sleep naked. Why does he?" Candy's blush deepened, and she turned away. "You kids, get out of Mr. Peterson's room now. He'll be along shortly." When I entered the kitchen, I found Candy in a bit of a struggle with Tim. I paused to hear her explanation about my choice of sleepwear, or lack thereof. Tim, sometimes adults make choices that aren't suitable for children. Well, it's Mr. Peterson's house, so he can sleep that way if he wants to. "You mean I can sleep naked in our house now? That's so cool. Hey, Sissy, we can sleep naked now in our house." "No, that's not what I mean, Tim. I mean, sometimes adults," I intervened, taking my place at the table. Looking at Tim, I said, "Let me handle this one, Candy." "Tim, sometimes adults choose to do things that—" I noticed Candy's glare and adjusted my approach. "Well, Tim, I suppose it's a matter of comfort and privacy, but mostly it's an adult thing. Grown-ups don't worry about being seen naked in their own rooms, and sometimes it's better for them to sleep that way. When you're older, you'll understand these things better, but for now, you need to listen to your mother, because she knows when it's appropriate to do certain things and when it isn't. You see, in the privacy of your own room, sometimes it's okay to do things that wouldn't be okay otherwise. So, if I'm alone in my room, I can be naked too." "No, Tim. You need to follow your mother's rules, and sometimes adults might need to check on you, so you shouldn't be naked where they might see you." "But Mommy sees me naked all the time. Why can she see me in the bathtub and when I'm dressing but not when I'm sleeping?" "Well, Tim, because she has to help you with those things, but she doesn't need to help you sleep. You can sleep alone and you need to be dressed in your pajamas. So, it's okay for a grown-up to sleep naked because no one will see them." "Well, sort of, Tim. It's the grown-up's choice. Nobody should be naked where others might be offended or in public. You see, I was in my bed alone and nobody could see me. I was covered properly, so there wasn't a problem until you and your sister came in and pulled the covers off me. That's what was wrong with it. It's like if someone tried to undress you in town, that wouldn't be right, would it? Tim grinned and nodded in acknowledgement. So, it's like we stripped you down, Mr. Peterson. I apologize for that. But if covers are akin to clothes, then why can't I hit the sack in the buff and cover up? Candy flashed me a smile, struggling to contain her laughter. Finally, she intervened. All right, Tim. That's enough. You need to understand that it's Mr. Peterson's bedroom and his house. He can do as he pleases in it. He's a grown-up, and if he prefers to sleep nude or in a suit, that's his prerogative. You can't do that because I'm your mother, and I say no. Okay. Okay, Mommy, but I really wish I could sleep naked. After breakfast, I strolled out to the patio, sipping my coffee. Once Candy had tidied up, she joined me with her own cup, settling beside me on the swing. I glanced at her. She had a mischievous smirk on her face. He's Candy. I'm sorry that happened. Tim really has a one-track mind, doesn't he? Well, Dean, he's just a little boy, you know, and I've yet to meet one who doesn't jump at the chance to strip down. Thanks, though, for trying to handle it. We enjoyed another round of coffee before I decided it was time to get to work. Things progressed smoothly, and for once, I finished early. I sent Candy and the kids home ahead of schedule. However, Candy seemed oddly bothered when I insisted on cleaning up the kitchen myself. Eventually, it was time for Candy's final divorce hearing. Her husband had been dragging his feet for over 4 months. I arranged my schedule so I could watch all 4 kids. While she was in court, we decided to head into town for some supplies. I needed filters and other equipment parts, so one of our stops was the implement dealer. The parts clerk greeted me with a smile as I entered. Hey Dean, it's been a while. Where's your lovely wife today? A chill shot through me, and I must have looked startled. The clerk quickly added, Oh, touchy subject, huh? My bad. I'm just used to seeing her in here getting parts for you. Well, say hi to her when you get home. I'm not married anymore. We've been divorced for almost a year. What? You're divorced, and she's still running around getting parts for you. Man, how did you manage that? I was bewildered. Patty had never come in for parts for me. Finally, I clarified, Oh, you mean Candy. She's not my wife. She just helps out with the kids and runs errands sometimes. She's at the courthouse today, trying to divorce her cheating husband. Sorry for the confusion. You must be joking, right? The way that woman speaks about you. Damn, I wish my partner talked about me like that. So, what are we getting today? I was relieved this was my last stop. I couldn't shake off what old man Scoggins had said at the parts counter. What exactly had Candy been saying about me? Candy and I arrived back at my place around the same time. When she walked into the house, she seemed visibly distressed. I glanced at her and asked, How did it go today? Is it all sorted? Candy's face contorted, and tears started streaming down. She choked out, Yes. No. The judge granted the divorce, but he's keeping child support pending a DNA test on the kids. That jerk claims they're not his kids and is trying to dodge child support. How can you even think that? He's the one who cheated. When would I even have had the time, even if I wanted to? Candy collapsed onto the couch next to me. Without thinking, I wrapped my arm around her, pulling her close to my chest. I ran my fingers through her hair as all 4 children entered the room. Sissy asked what was wrong and tried to hug her mother. I explained, Kids, your mother is upset because your father said some hurtful things to her today. Why don't you go play in your room while I talk to her and try to make her feel better? Candy glanced up at me, attempting a smile. Her hand grazed my chest as she wrapped her arm around me. She lay there, silently crying for several minutes. I just held her, stroking her gently to calm her. Gradually, her sobs subsided. I looked down to see her breathing softly, peacefully asleep against my chest. Damn, what was I going to do now? I remained seated, holding Candy as she slept. Almost 30 minutes later, she stirred and woke up. Her eyes flew open, and she sat up abruptly, blushing. Oh, I'm sorry, Dean, she said. Why did you let me fall asleep on you? No worries, Candy. You obviously needed the rest, and I didn't mind at all. I didn't have anything better to do than to comfort a friend. Really? Well, thank you anyway. I guess I should get dinner started now. It's going to be late as it is. Candy headed for the kitchen, but turned back to me. Dean, would you mind if we stayed the night tonight? I really don't feel like driving to Jackie's after dinner. No problem, Candy. You don't even need to ask. I enjoy having you here. Actually, once school starts, I think you should spend weeknights here so Tim can attend kindergarten nearby. That way you can keep working without worrying about arrangements for him and Jackie's. We'll just inform the school that you reside here, and they'll enroll him as a resident student. Dean, are you suggesting that I move in with you? Well, not exactly. I mean, it would be easier for you and the kids if you just stayed here. I don't expect anything else from you. We can carry on as we are now. Oh, I suppose we can do that. You're sure you don't mind? I feel like we're imposing, staying here even more. Maybe you should pay me less now that we're here more often. Over the next 3 weeks, Candy gradually moved all her and the kids' belongings into my house. Jackie helped her a couple of times, shooting me a smirk that made me curious. I wondered what was behind it. Just before school started, the DNA tests confirmed that Charles was the father of Candy's children. The court ordered child support, but no alimony was granted. It turned out that what I was already paying Candy was close to Charles' income, so there was no additional support. Even the child support was minimal, just $25 per week per child. After moving in, Candy took over even more household chores. She managed the house, yard, chickens, and even the garden during the season. She also assisted with the hog operation and helped me with the cattle. I began to realize how much she was doing and how I had struggled along before. Sometimes I'd catch myself smiling, realizing I hadn't been keeping up with everything before. Now, we were tackling lower priority repairs and even sprucing up the house and outbuildings together. Surprisingly, we had fun doing it. Candy was not only efficient, but also a joy to work with and be around. When a neighbor's son joined the military, I bought his 10-year-old truck. It was in good condition, and I wanted a reliable second vehicle besides Candy's old junker. She willingly came along to pick it up, and I had her drive it home. When we arrived, I insisted she keep the keys and put the spare set on the key rack. I told her, no, Candy, you keep them. I want you to drive the new truck or mine whenever you leave. I don't want to risk your old junker breaking down. Like clockwork, Candy stared at me for a moment, then burst into tears and rushed to her bedroom. That fall, we celebrated Thanksgiving and Christmas in my farmhouse. While I had no nearby relatives, Candy's brother and sister, along with their families, joined us. It was a festive time with kids playing and laughter filling the house, and the women, including Candy, cooked up a storm. I indulged myself in their delicious meals until I was practically sick. We even had a small New Year's gathering. After our guests left, Candy poured us each a glass of port, and we sat in the dimly lit den, watching the Christmas tree lights twinkle. Candy leaned against me, resting her head on my shoulder, and I wrapped my arm around her. As we relaxed together, I felt her trembling. I looked down to see tears silently streaming down her face. "What's wrong, honey?" I whispered. "What's wrong with me, Dean? Why do you always treat me like one of the guys? What did I do to make you feel this way about me? I'm not just another easy woman, Dean. Was it because of what happened the night of my divorce hearing? I mean, I could understand you holding back while I was still married, but what's the reason now? Why don't you desire me anymore?" I panicked internally. Where was this coming from all of a sudden? "Candy, I thought we were doing fine. There's absolutely nothing wrong with you. I know you've seen me vulnerable, but I wouldn't impose that on you. Honestly, Candy, I admire you more than any other woman. You're such a tremendous help around here, and I cherish every moment spent with you. I trust you implicitly, knowing you've got my back through thick and thin. How else should I treat you? You're my closest friend, and I only wish I'd met you sooner, before my life spiraled out of control. You're leagues ahead of those 3 I was married to. There's nothing wrong with you." My stomach twisted, fear gripping my heart. Was she really heading in that direction? And if she was, could I bear going through that again? We desperately needed to talk. Candy, if you're going where I think you're going, I don't know if that's a good idea. I've thought about it, but I'm not sure I can handle another heartbreak. I've been a failure, and every time. Candy recoiled, anger flashing in her eyes. Damn it, Dean, are you implying I'm as worthless as those 3 you married and divorced? Is that it? I'm a 2-time divorcee, and I'm not good enough for you. Haven't I proven my worth? We've been living together for almost 2 years. Our kids see us as a family. Hell, we've practically been married in every way except officially and physically. You've even put my name on your accounts. If you don't trust me, why did you do that? Don't you love me? No, I think. I struggled for words. I think I do love you, but I can't risk the pain of another breakup. I can't put my kids through that again. What about me, Dean? Don't you think I fear being hurt again? Don't you think I want to shield my kids from that pain? And what about now? Don't you think our children would be devastated if we split? It would tear me apart, and I know it would hurt you too. All I'm asking is for the chance to express my love for you physically. If you won't marry me, fine. I'll live with you outside of marriage. Everyone in town already thinks we are, so what's the difference? Candy, I can't deal with this right now. I need to rest. I'm sorry. I rose and left Candy on the couch, tears silently streaming down her face. I'd managed to ruin what should have been a beautiful holiday season. I'd upset the best thing that ever happened to me and my kids, and now I might lose her. Damn. Sleep eluded me. I heard Candy in the kitchen for what felt like hours after I'd gone to bed, until finally the lights went out. It was almost 4 in the morning when I gave up and left the bed. I roamed the darkened house, unable to find peace. The kids would be up in a few hours, starting another day, another year. What would it hold? I poured myself another glass of Glenlivet and stared out the window. A noise startled me, and I turned to see Candy standing there, looking at me. She offered a faint smile and said, "I guess I messed up today, huh? Do you want me to leave?" "I'm sorry for what I said, Dean." I couldn't comprehend what was happening in that moment. A sense of emptiness and fear enveloped me when Candy questioned if she should leave. There she stood behind me, illuminated by the moonlight, looking so vulnerable. Without even realizing it, I found myself moving towards her. Wrapping my arms around her, I pulled her close to me, and in that embrace, our first meaningful kiss transpired. Well, it wasn't entirely true. We had exchanged kisses before, but they were more platonic gestures. This kiss held the weight of lovers' passion. Candy's soft moan echoed as she pressed herself against me. As I gazed into Candy's eyes, I whispered, "No, please don't go. I'd be utterly lost without you here. If you were to leave, I don't think I could bear it. The others merely hurt me, but you take a piece of my heart with you, and I fear I'd perish without it." Confusion clouded her expression as she uttered, "What?" I kissed her again, feeling her surrender. I had to steady her as she seemed to weaken. Gathering her into my arms, I carried her to her bedroom. It was closer than mine, and without bothering to shut the door, I placed her gently on the bed, joining her soon after. What followed were hours of blissful intimacy. Suddenly, I pulled away from Candy with a jolt, startling her. "Dean, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice laced with fear. "Wait," I exclaimed as I dashed out of her room, my footsteps echoing through the hallway, across the living area, and into my bedroom. Frantically searching through the jewelry in a bowl atop my dresser, Candy approached me. Neither of us had bothered to dress after my impromptu departure from her bed. This is the moment. Finally, I turned to Candy, tears streaming down her cheeks once more. Taking her left hand in mine, I lifted her up. "I found it, Candy. I want you to have it. It belonged to my mother. Will you marry me, Candy? Please. I'm certain this is right. Candy, nothing happened to you. That's not what happened to me." I was scared and wallowing in self-pity. He woke me up. "I know this is the right thing to do." Candy's face lit up with a radiant smile, her left hand gently nudging towards the ring I held as she whispered the affirmative. I slid my mother's engagement ring onto Candy's finger. We kissed, then turned towards the bed. As we nestled under the covers, Candy chuckled softly. "Well, at least this way I won't have to sleep in the wet spot," she teased, planting a gentle kiss on my lips. "Good night, honey." Daddy, we can't find Candy. She's not in her room or the kitchen. Do you know where she is?" The sound of a stampede, akin to a herd of elephants, thundered through the den toward my bedroom. Oh, crap. The door stood wide open, revealing Candy still nestled in my bed. Hastily, I moved to cover her better as the stampede burst into my room. All four kids stopped and stared at Candy and me. She, too, had been awakened by the noise and was pulling a blanket over her. She was blushing, too. God, she was beautiful. Naturally, it was Tim who did it again. "Why are you lying in bed with Mr. Peterson?" he asked. I couldn't help myself. I burst into loud laughter. Candy stared at me and blushed even more. I moved over, leaning on the headboard of the bed, and pulled myself closer to Candy. I patted the edge of the bed and said, "Why don't you kids sit here for a minute? Mommy and I need to talk to you." "Kids, last night your mom finally made me realize that I've been sticking my head in last night your mom and I decided to get married. Now she's going to be your mom and I'm going to be your dad. Is that okay with you?" Sarah looked at the others and smiled widely. She nodded her head in agreement, but Tim said, "I thought she was our mom and you were our dad. That doesn't change anything, does it? But why did Mom sleep here last night instead of in her room? And why did she sleep naked? She doesn't usually sleep naked. She said we're not supposed to sleep naked." Candy giggled in spite of herself. I looked at her and hugged Timmy. "Timmy, when a man and a woman love each other like your mom and I do, they sleep together. We sleep together naked so we can be closer to each other and love each other more. That's why you kids shouldn't come into our bedroom without knocking and asking if you can come in. You don't want to see your mom naked and upset her, do you? It would really hurt her feelings, and you don't want to do that, do you?" Timmy shook his head, signaling a silent denial. Sarah observed us with a grin spread across her face. "I'm thrilled that Candy is going to be our new mother. We all adore you both so much. When are you going to tie the knot?" she inquired eagerly. Candy flashed a smile and replied, "We're not sure yet, Sarah. Hopefully soon, but there are a lot of things to sort out first." The younger kids had gathered around us on the bed, playfully clambering over Candy and me. Suddenly, the phone rang and Sarah swiftly picked it up. "Hello." "Yes. I'm not sure. Guess what, Aunt Jackie? Daddy and Candy are planning to get married," she exclaimed, excitement evident in her voice. I attempted to intervene and retrieve the phone from Sarah, but she evaded my grasp. "Okay. Sure, bye," she said before hanging up. "Sarah, you shouldn't have shared that with Aunt Jackie," I admonished gently. "Why not, Daddy? Was it supposed to be a secret?" she questioned innocently. "No, but your mother probably wanted to break the news herself," I explained regretfully. Candy, beside me, began to tremble, and I turned to her as Sarah apologized. "Oh, I'm sorry, Mom." Candy started crying harder, and I pulled her close to me. "What's the matter, honey?" I asked softly. She shook her head, tearfully murmuring, "Nothing. It's nothing at all. You called me her mother. She called me Mom." I ushered the kids into the den to watch cartoons while I embraced Candy, comforting her as she cried. As she gradually composed herself, I heard the sound of gravel shifting and a car door slamming shut. The back door burst open, and heavy footsteps echoed through the house. Voices emanated from the den, followed by rapid footsteps approaching our bedroom. I turned to the door just as Jackie stormed in, clad in her full sheriff uniform. She halted midway to the bed, catching sight of me nestled with her sister Candy. Candy's graceful form lay bare, her bosom nestled against my chest. Jackie planted her hands on her hips, a mixture of annoyance and relief flickering across her face. "Well, it's about time, you fool," Jackie exclaimed. "I was getting tired of hearing Candy lament and sob over your neglect. I was almost tempted to put you out of her misery myself." Taking a seat on the bed's edge, Jackie wasted no time in demanding an explanation. "Spill it, and make it quick. I've got to get back on patrol. How did you manage to crack through that thick skull of Candy's?" I met Jackie's gaze, a plea for privacy evident in my eyes. "Jackie, could you perhaps give us a moment?" I need to get dressed and brew some coffee. Looks like sleep is out of the question for now. With a resigned sigh, Jackie complied, exiting the room. But as I began to rise from the bed, she shot me a pointed look. I'll start the coffee, but make it snappy. Jackie. Candy's voice pierced the air, sending me scurrying for the bathroom and my clothes. She stopped halfway to the bed, noticing me pressed up against her sister Candy. Jackie put her hands on her hips. A mixture of annoyance and relief flashed across her face. "It's about time, you fool," Jackie exclaimed. "I'm sick of listening to Candy complain and sob over your neglect. I'm almost tempted to put you out of her misery myself." Sitting down on the edge of the bed, Jackie wasted no time in demanding an explanation. "Spit it out, and quick. I need to get back to patrolling. How did you manage to get through that thick skull of Candy's?" I met Jackie's gaze, a plea for privacy read in my eyes. "Jackie, could you give us a moment? I need to get dressed and make some coffee. Looks like sleep is out of the question for now." With a resigned sigh, Jackie complied and left the room. But as I started to get out of bed, she cast a hard look at me. "I'll make coffee, but make it sharp." Jackie. Candy's voice pierced the air, making me rush into the bathroom for my clothes. We tied the knot on Valentine's Day. Life carried on much as it had before, except now Candy shared my bed, and our love deepened in every aspect. Then, one autumn day, Candy broke the news. We were expecting. Despite our ages, we decided to embrace parenthood as soon as possible, fulfilling a promise I had made to her. As our little one embarked on their kindergarten journey, Candy found herself in tears, grappling with the passage of time and the feeling of aging. I took her hand, guiding her back towards our home. "Darling, let's ponder this. With the kids away and chores done, what shall we do with ourselves?" I inquired. Candy halted, drawing me close, her voice tinged with emotion. "I'm not sure, but I have a few ideas," she murmured, her hand tenderly cupping my cheek. "Dean, I love you more than words can express." I had stumbled in life's game before, but with Candy and our child by my side, I realized I had hit a grand slam. They showed me the true essence of love and fulfillment amidst the distractions of life. Thank you for watching this video to the end. If you liked it, please like it and subscribe to the channel. See you soon.